Okay, right now the kitty is in the way, and I am not going to move the... We are going to do tech checks just to make sure everything is working properly. I think it is. Looks like the sound is on my end, so that's all we're going to need for this one. But we need to switch... Okay, we need to switch that over to my headphones. And then to make it easier on me so I don't hear myself speaking in my ears, let's mute the feed on the YouTube section. Tonight I'm going to go over the Book of Mormon data science project I did this summer. Now, you're probably wondering why I did this in the first place. Well, some of you have probably been wondering about my religious background since I have delved into that topic. I haven't really brought it up because it's not relevant to this channel, but I was raised in a Mormon family. Many years ago, I read multiple studies that had conflicting results. Now, the studies that were Mormon suggested that the Book of Mormon had multiple different authors. All the non-Mormon studies suggested the Book of Mormon was the work of a single author, Joseph Smith. I have seen more recent studies that have explored ideas like there might be multiple 19th century authors for the Book of Mormon, considering a lot of the Book of Mormon is believed to have been plagiarized from 19th century sources. So, as someone who has a longish break in the summer that is unpaid, unfortunately, I usually give myself something to do over the summer, and this summer's project was to use something I learned in my grad school classes last year to see if I could determine if it's more likely for myself that the Book of Mormon had a single author or if the Book of Mormon had multiple authors. Now, how did I decide to do this? Well, I'm using something called the k-nearest neighbor, and give me a second because I need to bring something up in Jupyter Notebook. I'm also going to mute myself so you don't hear the click. Okay, we do have the Jupyter Notebook up and running now. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is my GitHub. You can actually go to this GitHub and download it if you wish. That is up to you. You are free to run this Jupyter Notebook for yourself. You will find the necessary data projects you will need here. I have cleaned the data for you. It's in 3 files that are all tar.gz files. You will need to extract them in your hard drive. And ideally, you'll need to use the bofm.ipynb file, which is a Jupyter Notebook file. For those of you who don't know, Jupyter Notebook is just basically a web server that you can run to do data science Python projects. So let's go over what I did to start here. Now, the first thing I did was just decide how I was going to go about this. Let's bring up the other screen for a second, stop sharing, so I can go over what I have in my Jupyter Notebook. All right, we need to... Nope, we don't want the entire screen. There we go. Okay, and we're going to full screen this just to make it easier for people to read on the screen. At least I thought I was. All right, maybe I can't. That's interesting. But as I said, I was asking, does it have different authors? So I'm going to start with a few caveats here, just because I always do this when I touch on religion. The caveats are, this is not the way you would probably determine authorship. This is just an algorithm you use when you have a choice to make between 2 things. And in this case, the choice was either the Book of Mormon had a single author or it didn't. So don't take this too seriously when you see my results. Now, what I chose to do this was something called the KNN algorithm. Basically, what I needed to do this was download text from the 1830s Book of Mormon, the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, and a similar text, or rather, a text from an author of the era that wasn't Joseph Smith. For this case, I chose Edgar Allan Poe. My methodology is to go through, pull all of the words out of the text, put them into a single file, 1 line each per word, and I did some data cleaning using regular expressions. Now, regular expressions deserve videos onto themselves. They're a rather complicated part of programming. They're just a way of detecting patterns in text. Now, as far as I know, a lot of people get really proud about the regular expressions they write, but I don't think anyone actually enjoys writing one, because writing a regular expression and getting to do what you want it to do is a royal pain in the posterior. So once I cleaned the data, I went through and wrote a Python script to generate the CSV files, which I probably should have put up on the Python part of the site, but I think each particular one of the tar balls has a different gen CSV that is specific to that particular text, because it turned out there was some different data cleaning you need to do on each of the texts, even the texts that have the same author. So the reason I chose the Doctrine and Covenants is because that is known to be the work of Smith. The reason I chose Poe is because it is not known to be the work of Smith. So what I did was went through, collected each of the word frequencies for each author after generating the CSV and implemented them into pandas. Or more clearly, what I did was I went through, I made the gen CSV file to generate a comma-separated values file to make sure that Python put the CSVs with the frequencies, the words with their frequencies in the final product. I could then pull this up in pandas. And then I would use the KNN algorithm to determine which author was more likely. After I run this on each of the books of the Book of Mormon, I would then see what the results were, and if I had a majority for Joseph Smith and a clear majority, like a supermajority, I would probably safely conclude that Joseph Smith was that the Book of Mormon had a sole author. I would not have determined if this was Joseph Smith, because that's not what I'm trying to do here. So, believe it or not, when I started this project, one of the things I was wondering about was what the null hypothesis should be. Now, the null hypothesis in statistics is the thing you're trying to prove that is incorrect. So, I could have gone two ways on this one. I could have accepted that the Mormons were correct and that the Book of Mormon had 12 different authors, or I could have accepted what most people who aren't Mormon believe and go with the idea that the Book of Mormon was the work of Joseph Smith. In this case, I decided to go with the idea that the Book of Mormon was indeed the work of 12 different authors, because I realized I was working against my own religious bias, and that way no one could accuse me of choosing my particular bias there. Now, it may have come up later in the word selection, and I will leave that as an exercise for the viewer. So what you're going to see next is me importing some text files that contained a list of words from certain Edgar Allan Poe stories into a pandas data frame. Now, this is not the most efficient way to do this. I probably should have put it in an array, or rather the list is in Python, and then gone through each item in the list, and that would have saved me a lot of typing. But this will give you an idea of what pandas looks like and how to do it. By the way, I should go back up to the top of the notebook and let everyone see here. The first line that is actual Python code is just importing certain libraries. Import numpy as np, which I can get rid of because I didn't use it. Import pandas as pd, which is the data science library. And import matplotlib.pyplot as plt, which will let us ultimately plot our results. So once we went through and got all of the texts into different data frames, it looks like, what we did was we just wanted to see a bit what the data looked like and made sure it did it properly. And we can see that we did get some text in the fall of the House of Usher. Now, I don't know why I did the next thing as 2 steps. I probably could have done it as 1. And what I wanted to do was put all of these texts into a single data frame instead of 10 different data frames, which I had did above. Now, a data frame is just, think of it as a spreadsheet. Think of it as a spreadsheet that Python can read. So in this case, we're just going through the process of, we are merging a new frame with the existing frame, and we're calling it a Poe frame as the merged data frames, and we're going to do that for each of the stories we used. And the final line, which says .filna0 at the end, that's just so it's numbers at the end rather than NaN, which will make it easier. The problem is this may lead to division by 0 errors, but that did not happen here. All right, what you're seeing now is just the data frame I generated from that. Rather than go through and have the stories at each of the top of the frame, I just labeled it Poe1, Poe2, up to Poe10, because that's going to make things a little easier later, as you see. And then I used a method in Pandas to generate the mean of the columns Poe1 through Poe10 and put it at the end. As you can see, it looks like a spreadsheet. I also, in this case, set index to word just to make things easier in the long run as well. So after we got the Poes sorted out, what we need to do now is go through our 1835 Doctrine and Covenants text. Now, I don't know if I brought this up earlier, and if I didn't, it's important. There was a reason for choosing the Doctrine and Covenants and the Book of Mormon in their original editions. The books have gone through considerable editing since they were released, and I wanted to have them as close as Joseph Smith's writing as possible. Apparently I have a blank line here for some reason. I'm just going to delete that. So after we do that, we need to get some more data, and it looks like I commented a bunch of things out that I don't need. And what we're doing here is we're combining the Smth frame into the Poe frame, so we have it all in one place. Again, this is just more Python code doing that. And where is the rest of my text? There should be more to this text, huh? Okay, give me a second because I did not upload the correct bofm.ipynb. I need to go find my laptop and fix that. I thought I fixed that earlier. All right. Well, no, the problem is it's an older version of the file that was uploaded to GitHub, and it really should be the newer one. So give me a few seconds here. I've brought out my trusty ThinkPad, and we will fix what's on GitHub. If I had done this from my ThinkPad to begin with, this would not be an issue. Unfortunately, I'm doing it from my Windows computer, which has a better setup for streaming. I had thought everything was ready on the GitHub already, but apparently I was wrong about that. All right, let me upload the file now. Okay, we're in the right directory on my ThinkPad. All right, I probably forgot to hit commit changes on GitHub, and that was the issue. All right, now it should be the correct file on GitHub. And now we need to go back, and it's not going to change what's on screen, and download it. I'll just say hi to the people who showed up tonight while I'm doing that. Hello, Fern. Love Bond, is that what it says? Yes. And hello, Ninja Ravens. Honestly, if I thought more people would have been interested in this, I would have scripted this properly rather than just on a live stream. I was not expecting there to be high interest in it. All right, so we need to download the ipynb. We've done that. Save. And we want to open a new, actually want to close this Jupyter Notebook. Hopefully that will not shut down the server. All right, that was not what I wanted to happen. All right, apparently it needs. There we go, there's the file. Okay, I think we need to reshare our screen. Give me a second here because it's a new Jupyter Notebook. We need to close the old one. And let's make sure we have the data I think we should have had. All right, yes, it looks like we do. Before sharing the screen. Give me a few more seconds here. I probably should have muted myself while clicking. There we go. So we treat the Smth frame the same way we treated the Poe frame. Then we want to combine the Smth frame and the Poe frame because we're going to use those to get the averages for each word in our KNN runs. So the next thing we do after we do that is we want to, just as a test here, I wanted to import the first book of the Book of Mormon, which is 1st Nephi. So I went through doing a new data frame, or rather creating a new data frame and combine it with the combined frame and adding it on to the end. Combined frame, we set the index word again because we want the index to be the word, and in place equals true is just a way of making sure that we're not creating a copy. We want the actual data frame we created to change. If you don't use in place equals true, the data frame will just be a copy of the original with the new stuff added on. So the next thing I did was set up a few lists, which is the Python equivalent of array, and then I set up another list of words we were going to use as our data points for comparison. Now, the KNN algorithm uses the distance algorithm, and I don't know if you remember what the distance distance formula is from your geometry class. It's just a way of determining the distance between 2 points. What you learned in your geometry class was a 2-dimensional version of it. You do not need to use it for only 2 dimensions. I chose 10 words for greater accuracy here, and that means I'm going to have to write a long distance formula as you see later. So we will get to that at the end. You will see if it's more likely the work of a single author or the work of multiple authors. So we are going to go through and put the averages for Poe into A averages, Smth into B averages, and for the Book of Mormon into U averages. I did this by, looks like a nested for loop, and I think there's just some debugging code here that's not really necessary, but after I get the averages in the second loop, once it pulls out of that second inner loop, I want it to append the averages, and to get the averages, I divide the total by 10, since that's what I'm choosing. So you can see what the averages in the Book of Mormon were down here. And then next, we're doing our functions. So we have 2 helper functions here, and we're just doing it on 1st Nephi right now. We have the distance function just to determine which one is closer, and we have the distance function returning a list depending on which number was passed to it. So in order to make it more readable, like I should have done in the first place, I'm going to put these all on separate lines. which will make it take up more space on screen, but it will make it easier for humans to read it. And this is something you probably want to do in your code. You want other people to be able to read what you do, especially since I want other people to come through and see if they can prove what I did right or wrong. I want people to be able to do it on their own, and that's the advantage of the Jupyter Notebook. You do not even have to know Python, as long as I did my Python correctly, to run it on your own. And what I'm doing right now is that Python does require correct indentation, so I'm making sure the indentation is the same for all levels. This is actually one of the weak things about Python and kind of annoying, but it is what it is. And why did that happen? So we have to go through X, Y, and Z yet. Well, Python is generally the lingua franca for data science as well as artificial intelligence applications. And what we're doing here is essentially a data science project. So yes, Python is technically a snake, but it is named after the British acting troupe Monty Python. And finally, if a number more than 2 or less than 0 was passed to it, we're going to have the program raise a type error because we shouldn't have received that. The next one is just, we're calling the neighbors function, and whatever it returns, we're going to append to an array called neighbors. And finally, the last one is neighbors.sort reverse equals true. That's going to sort them in descending order. And then we can use the KNN algorithm based on which author appears most on the top, and we're going to use an odd number to do that. So the next one, we set our k value equal to 9, because it has to be an odd number. And I think just because of the way Python works, that should not be 9. If we want 9 values, no, I think that's correct for Python, because Python goes up to 1 less but starts at 0. Let me look up the range function quick to make sure I'm correct on that. Documentation is our friends when we're not sure how functions work. And the range something is easy to forget because Python doesn't do what most other languages. Yes. Okay, it starts by 0 by default, so we can have a k of 9 there if we're using a for loop. If we're using a while loop and starting at 0, we'd want it to be 8. So we're going to go through each of the item in our neighbors array, or list in this case, and we're going to see, is the author 1? And then we're going to set our Poe count to 1. If it's Smith, or the author's 2, we're going to set our Smith count to be equal to 1 additional. Or rather, we're going to add 1 each time we encounter those. And wow, I really should have scripted this tonight. And finally, then we're going to see what the results of our poll, that's what it's called, were. If the count was greater for Poe, then it was more likely written by Poe. If the count was greater for Smith, then it was more likely written by Smith. So, what we can see based on what is on the screen there, I don't know if you can see it, is that First Nephi was more likely written by Joseph Smith than Poe. All right, my methodology that I'm using here, this doesn't matter too much. We want to see if multiple books show that they're more closely to one author than the other, thus making sole authorship more likely. So the next thing I do in the next particular cell is I create a list of the other books in the Book of Mormon, and then I go through and use some more efficient coding to add each of the remaining books of the Book of Mormon, thus creating an even larger data frame. Yes, I am doing scripting now, but I mean scripting the video. Now, if it turns out I'm wrong and people show more interest in this, I might actually do a scripted version of this. But given its religious content and being that it's just really obscure data science, I don't think most people would be interested. And then we're going to do essentially what we did before, but we're going to modify it a little just so we can use how did I modify it? Well, I modified it so we can use the book we're sending to it, which are books in the Book of Mormon. Then we use the pandas library to look for the word in that particular column of the data frame. And then we go through and do the distance algorithm. And I'm looking, did I do this right? Oh, yes, I did. Okay, good. And again, we're going to send each book of the Book of Mormon through it. Sorry, we're going to send each of the Poe frames through it and each of the Smth frames through it just to see which one comes out on top. Then we do the same thing we did before, and we just append the results to a dictionary. At least I think we're doing a dictionary. Then we just do our poll, see which one won the poll, and we add the accounts as appropriate. I think there's still a print statement here that was for debugging that I don't need. So I didn't run this, so I'm not going to do that, but we are going to save the notebook. All right, I know that wasn't interesting. So the final thing we're going to do is we want to visualize our data. In this case, this was just my interest. We're going to expand this a little bit so we can see the bar. Now, what I personally expected is that Poe would at least win some of the polls, just by sheer coincidence. What I found is that Smth won all of them. So it seems based on the results of this that the Book of Mormon likely has a single author. Now, if you wanted to expand on this, you would go through, check my math, and I need to go back and check to make sure I got the frequencies correctly. Also, if I want to convert them to percentages, I need to multiply each frequency by 100, but it shouldn't matter to the overall results. It's just one's an actual percentage and the other's a decimal. And if I wanted to get even more accuracy, I would include multiple authors, or more than likely, I would simply use a different algorithm for text analysis altogether. So if you want to check this out, it's on my GitHub. I will post a link to it. I think I have in the community section posts. I will post it in the actual comments below for people who want to check it out. And feel free to go through it, check my math, see if I've gotten any logic wrong, and suggest any better ways of doing this. And that is using the k-nearest neighbor algorithm to see if an author is more likely the author of a text. But ideally, you would use the k-nearest neighbor when you have a clear choice between two authors, such as going through a book by King and Straub, which I understand exists, and seeing which sections were more likely written by Stephen King and which sections were written by Straub, because you would know that that book was written by both of them, but you wouldn't know which of them wrote each section. So you could use the KNN algorithm to easily determine that. For the most part, this was just personal curiosity. I wanted to challenge myself and see if the conclusion I had come to about the Book of Mormon decades ago was correct or if I was wrong. Now, based on the results of this, it turns out I was correct. But next summer, I will probably choose a more interesting project. It'll probably be a game again. Thanks for watching, everyone. I know this was dull and dry. I know I should have scripted it. Go out and write some code.